To order. Welcome to meeting number 64 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans. This meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of June 23rd, 2022. A reminder to all, please address your comments to the Chair. Screenshots or taking photos of your screen is not permitted. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. In accordance with the committee's routine motion concerning connection tests for witnesses, I am informing the committee that all witnesses have completed the required connection tests in advance of the meeting. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and a motion adopted on January 18, 2022, the committee is resuming its study of the ecosystem impacts and the management of pinniped populations. I would like to welcome our first panel of witnesses. As an individual, we have Mr. Glenn Blackwood, Vice President, Memorial University of Newfoundland, retired by video conference. Representing the BC Commercial Fishing Caucus is Jim McIsaac, Managing Director, also by video conference. And representing the David Suzuki Foundation, we have Keelan Steffest, Marine Conservation Specialist by video conference as well. Thank you for taking the time to appear today. You will each have up to 5 minutes for an opening statement. We will start the statements with Mr. Blackwood for 5 minutes or less, please.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. So that's my official job title. I just retired. But over the past 2 years, I took on the challenge, a bit reluctantly at first, of looking at a seal science review and through a process which created the Atlantic Seal Science Task Team. So we're 7 people, and I sent a package which will be translated and passed to you later that participated in that. And unfortunately, during COVID, we couldn't have public meetings. We actually never met as a committee, but we had great representation from Nova Scotia, PEI, and Newfoundland and Labrador, and a representative from the Magdalen Islands who unfortunately, due to work commitments, wasn't able to complete the process and left us after a few months. And from New Brunswick as well, I should mention, from the Atlantic Salmon Federation. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is basically a short summary of that report and how it changed some of my views with respect to seal populations and some of the challenges we faced in looking at lots of science and science that in some cases there's enough evidence, if you will, that seals are having a major impact, like on 4T cod. And in other cases, the samples taken by industry are completely different than the samples taken by DFO science in terms of geographic area and time of the year and stomach contents. So I'll talk about that a bit later on as well. I grew up on the Northeast Coast. I've chaired the Canadian Centre for Fisheries Innovation. I was an ADM of fisheries, and my family have a long history of making a living from the sea. So I'm no stranger to seals, but I had been away from it for a while, and I find it a very polarizing issue and one that people take sides and dig in. And a friend of mine once said the fishery is dog eat dog and vice versa. Well, seals can be just as polarizing and just as controversial. So in chairing the committee, I had to balance the very passionate pleas from industry that something be done right away. And also what we were doing wasn't making recommendations on seal size of seal population or what they feed upon. What we were doing is identifying why DFO science at the time got different results than what industry got. And over 2 years, unfortunately, it took a bit longer than we thought, largely because of the COVID restrictions. But over those 2 years, we did come to agreement as a group, and we did 9 recommendations to hopefully close that gap. And I understand that DFO is working on those recommendations, but it will take a while to implement. And but as I said, in other areas like gray seals, we've got a lot of evidence already, and where the industry is and where DFO is on this is not that far apart. So I think that's close to 5 minutes, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Blackwood. We'll now go to Mr. McIsaac for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for the invitation to speak to you today. I'm truly privileged to have grown up on this coast and fished on this coast all my life. I It paid my way through university. When I graduated, I was offered a teaching and research position, but I kept on fishing. My heritage is Scottish on my father's side, from a fishing community in the Orkney Islands, and Irish on my mother's side, a farming community, County Meath. I'm George Patrick Ann's son, James. I come from food production naturally. I'm going to talk about 4 things. Some of the impacts of the 1970 Fisheries Act pinniped protection measures on salmon, hooligan, and shrimp, ecosystem-based management at Parks Canada, EBM at DFO, and the need for EBM to shift at DFO. I'm going to follow the slides that were distributed, I believe, to the panel, to the committee members. So slide 1 is I took this picture last November in Cowichan Bay. This wharf was put in by fishermen 8 years ago. The sea lions took over almost immediately. Between 300 and 400 sea lions spend September through November eating 10 to 16 kilograms of returning salmon per day each. Mariners cannot safely use that wharf. Slide 2, DFO enacted Fisheries Act regulation changes in 1970 to fully protect seals and sea lions. Prior to this, there was a $5 bounty on seals and sea lions noses in British Columbia. This graphic shows exponential growth and then leveling out of the harbor seal population in the Strait of Georgia. The sports fishery is also graphed on this, and it shows the inverse relationship. Some sectors are licensed to protect their livelihoods from pinnipeds, not fishermen. Slide 3, the sea lion population growth over the last 50 years continues to rise. I see in this graphic here. They now consume more fish than the entire wild fishery, almost double. Slide 4, the decline in salmon catch started in the early 1970s. The fishery had a $1.2 billion restructuring in 95 to 98. Slide 5, the most recent modeling data shows seal and sea lion biomass are still going up. Slide 6, along with salmon, the number of commercial harvesters is declining from 21,000 in 1990 to 5,000 just a couple of years ago. Again, the inverse relationship to pinniped growth. Slide 7, and now we are reducing the salmon fishery even further, closing another 60% of the fishery. Slide 8, seals and sea lions have a very diverse diet. More than salmon are impacted. They eat over 54 species, different species. Slide 9, I was in Knights Inn at this time last year. This is one of the most remote places on our coast, the Ooligan Run this time of year. Slide 10, various species follow the Ooligan in. Seals, sea lions, porpoises. This photo shows a pod of porpoises herding Ooligan, then having a feeding frenzy. Slide 11, First Nations set up weirs in the river to harvest Ooligans and produce grease, gold in these parts. Sea lions make their way up the river and harvest Ooligan. Last year, they found their way into the weir and feasted overnight. Like salmon, the Ooligan population has been declining since the early 1990s. Sea lion and seal consumption of Ooligan is estimated at 60 to 70% of the returning run size on our coast. Slide 12. In the middle of the 1990s, BC's shrimp fishery was one of our most valuable fisheries, 10 million per year just in Queen Charlotte Sound. The shrimp fishery has a bycatch of Ooligan. In 1998, DFO blamed the shrimp fishery for Ooligan decline. Seals and sea lions consume over 250 times the current shrimp Ooligan bycatch limits. DFO has kept the $10 million Queen Charlotte fishery closed for the last 25 years. Today, our shrimp fishery is worth less than $1 million. Meanwhile, our neighbors, Washington and Oregon, have a $300+ million shrimp fishery. Slide 13, Parks Canada takes their role of ecosystem management seriously. They manage all species, including human activity. They have eradication and cull programs that keep ecosystems in balance. Slide 14. DFO endorses ecosystem-based management along our coast, but their main focus is in managing harvesters. Their risk-averse approach is to close fisheries first. Ecosystem-based management needs to be more than this. Slide 15. If we want to eat fish from our ecosystem, DFO needs to manage more than just people. They need to be more like Parks Canada and do true ecosystem-based management. Slide 15. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. We'll now go to Mr. Steffes for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm a registered professional biologist in British Columbia, and I'm currently employed as the Marine Conservation Specialist for the David Suzuki Foundation. Prior to joining the David Suzuki Foundation, I spent 10 years as a research scientist studying temperate marine and coastal ecosystems. I'm here today to provide a science-based perspective on two issues that I believe are fundamental to the committee's study of the ecosystem impacts and management of pinniped populations. Firstly, I would like to address the belief that there's an overpopulation of pinnipeds on our coasts, as the motion for this study asserts. This belief is generally based on the steep growth experienced by many pinniped populations in the second half of the 20th century. However, to fully understand the current status of pinniped populations, we must look beyond that narrow snapshot of steep growth, often presented by proponents of pinniped culls. In the middle of the last century, many pinniped populations were severely depleted as a result of decades of commercial harvesting and predator control programs. In the Pacific, for example, harbor seals had been reduced to 10% of their historic abundance. The steep growth seen after the species received protection is therefore not the sign of a population explosion, but rather a population recovering from overexploitation. Since their successful recovery, most pinniped populations have been stable at or near historic levels, with very little change over the last few decades. Populations that have been stable for decades at or near historic levels are clearly not exhibiting signs of overpopulation. And it is worth noting that the numbers of pinnipeds we are seeing today have coexisted with healthy and abundant fish stocks in the past. The second issue I would like to speak to is the notion that simply because pinnipeds consume a certain volume of a fish stock, reducing the number of pinnipeds would benefit that stock. Marine food webs are far too complex for such a simplistic approach to work. On the West Coast, for example, a pinniped cull is being proposed to restore Pacific salmon populations. However, the most recent diet data from the Salish Sea shows that harbor seals prey on 57 different species. Each of these 57 species represents a pathway for unintended consequences of an pinniped cull to ripple through the food web, with potentially devastating impacts on the ecosystem and the very fish stocks we are trying to restore. One of those possible unintended consequences is an increase in the Pacific hake population. Pacific hake are the most common prey item for harbor seals in the Salish Sea, making up 24% of their diet on average, compared to 3.5% for Chinook and 2.2% for sockeye. We know that Pacific hake prey on juvenile salmon, which means a pinniped cull could actually lead to an increase and not a reduction in the mortality of Pacific salmon. While my example is focused on the West Coast, the underlying drivers, which are the inherent complexity of temperate marine food webs and the generalist feeding habits of pinnipeds, apply elsewhere. This is why comprehensive reviews of culling programs from ecosystems across the world have found that unintended consequences for the target species and the wider ecosystem are commonly observed. A cull of pinnipeds to benefit commercially valuable fish stocks is therefore a gamble with the health of coastal ecosystems of epic proportions and with questionable prospects of achieving the desired outcome. The unpredictability and riskiness of this gamble is compounded by the significant and rapid changes we are already seeing in coastal ecosystems as a result of climate change. These changes are not only affecting the survival and recovery of commercial fish stocks like salmon or cod, but are also having an impact on pinniped populations through the reduction of sea ice, intensification of disease outbreaks, and decreases in prey availability. But pinnipeds are not only impacted by climate change, they also play an important role in climate change mitigation. A study published just last month in a leading scientific journal showed that protecting and restoring wild animal populations, including pinnipeds, can significantly enhance the natural carbon capture and storage capacity of ecosystems. The best way to safeguard Canada's fisheries for future generations in the face of climate change is therefore to maintain healthy, diverse, and resilient ecosystems. The culling of pinnipeds with unpredictable outcomes would be counterproductive to this goal. Thank you very much for your time. I look forward to answering your questions, and I'm happy to provide you with any of the source materials I've cited in my opening statement.
Thank you for that. We'll now go to our first round of questioning. We'll go to Mr. Small first for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My first question is to Mr. Killen. Mr. Killen, if the pinniped population increased drastically, what would they eat?
As I mentioned, thank you for the question. They eat a huge variety of prey, which makes it so hard to predict.
But if the population, if the population of pinnipeds doubled, what would be the impact on the species they preyed on?
There would be an increase in the consumption of prey.
Thank you. The other thing is, so if the population of seals decreased, wouldn't you inversely think that the effects on the fish that they preyed on would be reduced?
Not necessarily. Yeah, there's an example from the West Coast, for example. Pacific herring make up 22% of harbor seal diet, and yet there's a positive relationship between seal abundance and herring recruitment because the seals keep a predator for herring in check.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Chair, my next question is to Mr. Blackwood. Mr. Blackwood, of the 9 recommendations in the task team's report, which is the most important in your opinion?
Most important, I guess it's the sampling of seal diet sampling and stomach sampling that would need to take place in the offshore area and throughout the range and the range and full migration route of harp seals. So we've got a seal that covers a range of about 1,500, 1,600 miles. And we're sampling near shore in the winter when there's no cod and capelin, primarily. So I think the recommendations were good, and I think they were designed to close the gap between where DFO science says there's no impact on that part of the ecosystem, and fishermen and other stakeholders truly believe that there is.
Thank you, Mr. Blackwood. In the U.S., and more specifically in Washington and Oregon, a lobby was formed to have the Marine Mammal Protection Act amended to allow euthanizing of seals on the Columbia River. So again, Mr. Blackwood, questions for you. What can the Canadian government do to lobby the U.S. to make a similar amendment to the MMPA that would help markets open up for pinniped products from Canada?
Sort of outside of my range here on the marketing side, but obviously the acts in the Magnuson Act in the U.S. and the acts in Europe that closed borders to seal products shut down the fishery that we had for several hundred years, basically. And right now, there's not much of a fishery at all. Meanwhile, seal populations have grown during the time from the 70s from a couple million animals to 7.6 million animals at the moment. And that distribution population change has caused seals to show up in places we haven't seen them, like in rivers. And their change in distribution and their change in feeding, we're not capturing with the historic sampling program in the near shore.
Again, Mr. Chair, for Mr. Blackwood, the U.S. has been euthanizing pinnipeds in the Columbia River. Yet our government 2 years ago banned the euthanizing of nuisance seals here in Canada, and the reason for doing so was that we were told that there were trade sanctions threats against our seafood. So if the Americans are euthanizing nuisance seals, does it make sense that our government banned that same practice when they amended their own Marine Mammal Protection Act to let them do it themselves? So is it a real threat?
I don't know the numbers that were being euthanized previously. I think it was primarily in the aquaculture industry and other areas. Current population levels of gray seals and harp seals, nuisance seals or rogue seals, I guess, you know, the individual animal is having a bigger impact on an existing operation than the total population. But there's no conservation issue with respect to seal populations in Atlantic Canada that I'm aware of. And most populations are at or near the highest level ever observed. And some of these populations are the largest of that species in the world. So an individual animal, I don't see it as a conservation issue. And I think the Magnuson Act is largely a political issue.
Also, Mr. Blackwood, given that several countries hunt pinnipeds and whales, and they don't fear sanctions in the U.S., is the threat of sanctions against Canadian seafood products in the U.S. market, are those threats based on something that's real, or is it just something to try to influence politicians and lawmakers?
I'm not an expert in that area at all, but I will say that there's a real concern in industry and governments that would be an impact. But as you say, Norway, Iceland harvest seals and whales, and continue. And most of the NAMCO member countries continue to harvest those marine mammals in a sustainable way, not a cull, but in a harvest. So I don't see a problem with that, and I think, I'd like to see an industry develop around the product, because the resource is and has been a resource for many years, and it's a shame if it's just wasted.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Small. We'll now go to Mr. Hardy for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to everybody who's joined us today. Mr. Steffes, I'm going to probably dwell mostly with you in this round of questioning because your organization and the namesake, along with a lot of celebrity activists, have definitely had a major influence on general public opinion. I would point out your use in your comments to the word cull, and this is something that we very, very specifically tried not to reference. In fact, we've been talking about harvest, where there is a use to the animals once they are harvested. I want to present some empirical evidence and get your comment on it. Norway found a way to make their pinnipeds go away. They're very coy about how that happened. But we have heard that their cod stocks have been rebuilding quite nicely. In Atlantic Canada, pinniped populations continue to grow to the highest levels ever seen, according to some that we've heard from. And our cod stocks, after all these years, what is it, 30 years, 40 years, 30 years? We still haven't gotten to the point where we could say they're stable. So can you comment on that empirical evidence and what it says to you?
So I have to admit, I'm not very familiar with the Norwegian data you've referenced, but what I will say is that, humans have been culling or conducting predator control of pinnipeds for at least 100 years. And yet there's not a single scientific study or evidence that has ever benefited fish stocks. If you have one, I'd like to see it, but from my review of the scientific literature, I have not come across that. So I think that says something. And, even studies, for example, on the Southern Gulf of St. Lawrence cod, where they said a 65% reduction could prevent the local stock going extinct, clearly specified that there is a potential for unintended consequences, and they did not address that. And, that's just a very common feature of a discussion of significant reductions in pinniped populations to benefit a fish stock, that we simply cannot predict the outcomes of those actions.
Getting back to evidence that people who are on the water and trying to make a living from the fishery, what has the Suzuki Foundation heard from indigenous organizations or commercial fishermen like Jim McIsaac, for that matter? Do you talk to them, and do you factor what they observe into the position that the foundation is taking?
So I'm aware of the indigenous proposed cull of pinnipeds on the West Coast, and I would say there's very divergent opinions on the issue in First Nations. They're not a monolith. And so I think one thing where science probably has a bit of an advantage over the more on the ground, on the water information is that pinniped diet is so varied. They prey on so many different species, and it varies by location, it varies by season, it varies by age, it varies by sex. And so having comprehensive diet sampling studies, for me, are more relevant than someone observing a seal feeding on a certain thing. Because that's the other thing. Like, pinnipeds are very in-your-face kind of predators, right? Like, we don't see other predatory fish feeding on salmon or cod or herring, but seals we can see. And I think that's why they often end up as a scapegoat for natural mortality of fish.
Evidence that we've heard previously suggests that the seal population on the East Coast is actually suffering. The animals are smaller. The natural abortion rate among females is higher. They're eating shrimp instead of other species because those other species are no longer greatly available. And we heard the suggestion that a harvest, and I'll use that word instead of the word you're using, a harvest might in fact be beneficial to the overall health of the population. Can you comment on that?
Would you mind if I just quickly go into that distinction between a cull and a harvest? Because it seems like an issue that keeps coming up.
Well, you keep using the word cull, and that has a very charged and emotive, meaning to people, especially the general public. A harvest where the animal isn't just killed gratuitously to get it out of the way, but there's actually, a market and a use for the products, such as, the vitamins and other, things that can come from seals that the world needs. So there is a difference in those two words, sir. And the use of the word cull is now a pejorative, in fact, in this discussion.
But I think, you can have a different perspective on what the distinction is, right? And I understand that for a harvester, for example, the end use of the...
I don't want to go there. I want you to comment on what we heard from the East Coast, that the population, in fact, is suffering because it's running out of food. It's eating things that now, are not giving it the nutrition, and that doing something about the population could actually improve the well-being of seals and sea lions right across the board. And maybe, I think I'm out of time, but maybe you can work something like that into other answers to questions. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hardy. We'll now go to Madame Debienne for 6 minutes or less, please.
Merci. Thank you, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here. It's always very instructive. I'm happy to have someone who's more sceptical about the management of pinnipeds and the way in which we are thinking around the table so that we can come up with good recommendations for the government. And it's important to have polarizing opinions so that we can challenge ourselves and put the right questions to ourselves in a wise way for the future. So I'm going to stick with Mr. Stiefest from the David Suzuki Foundation. I know that foundation well myself. I don't think there's anyone round the table, and there's very few people who worry about the ecosystem balance in our rivers and oceans who would want us to have a wild cull or a total cull of a population, whether it's pinnipeds or others, in order to just cull animals for the sake of culling them. So I strongly defend respect for animals, and in particular respect for nature. So from that point of view, I'd like to hear from you about the question of balance between prey and predators. I've often raised that question around this table. On the planet, there's a natural balance between prey and predators. In human history over time, man has been part of this exercise. So given that context, when there was seal hunting, there had been some abuse. That's always the case. And we're not going to talk about the abuse that happens with other animals that are raised and bred in an industrial way, and we hang them up live on hooks because it doesn't cost so much. There's lots of horrors out there. But if we turn to what's happening with Indigenous people, with the Richardson people in the Magdalen Islands who've survived thanks to this seal hunt, when we stopped the seal hunt, did we not break away from an ecological balance between prey and predators that would have been precious for the future?
And I also want to clarify, I agree that humans are part of nature and the ecosystem. And I'm not here in any way to speak out against a sustainably managed seal harvest. But my distinction between a cull and a harvest, I think, is different to some of the members of the committee, because I can understand why the end use of the seal is important for like a harvester or a societal value discussion, but for the ecosystem, what happens to the seal after it's been killed doesn't matter, right? And so for me, from an ecosystem perspective, a more meaningful distinction is how do we set our management objectives for the harvest? Because generally in conventional fisheries management, our objective is to ensure a healthy population and healthy ecosystem function. But then if you're actually wanting to kill seals to benefit fish stocks, that's the opposite of that, right? Because you're actually trying to depress the population and actively alter how the ecosystem functions. And what's linked to that is really then how you set your harvest rate. Because, you know, a harvest rate based on a sustainable and healthy population is very different to saying we want to benefit a certain fish stock, because the literature is very clear that to have any chance at all for a pinniped cull to benefit finfish populations, you would have to have a reduction of at least 50%. And that would completely fall outside of the bounds of a sustainably managed harvest. So for me, that is a more meaningful distinction from an ecosystem perspective between a cull and a harvest.
So, I'm going to tell you a small family history. My father was a cod fisher, and when he arrived, the polemical debate about stopping the seal hunt. Well, my father had been out in the water and he knew these animals well and the relationships between them. And the fish in the St. Lawrence River was his citizen science, just as we have today. And we've heard from some of these citizen scientists before the committee. And spontaneously, my dad turned to me. I was out fishing with me, and he said, now that they've stopped with the seal hunts, let's enjoy this moment where we can eat cod, because within a decade it's going to start to drop off and it'll be finished. And then a few years later, I became friendly with a scuba driver, and he said that there were lots of eviscerated cod down on the seabed, and the viscera was disappearing, and my boyfriend saw seals attacking cod fish in the water when he was diving. So what do you think about this yourself? I think that we agree on certain points, because, of course, we have to have a fair and balanced management of the pinniped population, and managing it doesn't mean that there needs to be a massive cull. So what do you think about on the sea knowledge? Does the foundation collect data from people who are living alongside the river?
So the foundation is involved in all kinds of forums around fisheries management on the West Coast. And I have to admit, I'm not as familiar with the issue on the East Coast, because my work is really focused on the Pacific. But absolutely, I think we are listening to the commercial fishing sector on a whole host of issues. And I also understand that the examples you gave, you know, they create a very visceral and emotional response. And from someone who depends on the cod fishery, for example, I can absolutely, on a personal level, understand that. But I think when we're trying to make management decisions, they can't be based on those kind of emotional responses, right? It needs to be based on the best available data and what we know about the ecosystem.
Thank you. We'll now go to Ms. Barron for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. My first question is for Mr. McIsaac. Thank you for being here, Mr. McIsaac. And we've had others from the West Coast here at our committee, and I'm wondering if you can share with us the first logical step on how to best move forward. I know there was a suggestion that we have an experimental seal harvest. I think of 5,000 was the number by Mr. Stabler, who was here before. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are around the next best step on the West Coast.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that question. It's a good question. So I think it's difficult. Because we've got these polarized views about any kind of harvest going forward, or a reduction in population to benefit fisheries. Questioning whether that's good for the ecosystem or not. We have our fisheries here. If you watch the kind of the video footage for the herring fishery over the last 2 months, you would have seen herring sets that are full of sea lions and seals, and going into nets and eating and disrupting the fishery. There was gillnet fisheries. If you set a lone gillnet, in this or for a herring fishery, they were cleaned out. You had to set multiple nets in order to have one that is able to fish. So you have a population that is out of control from a fisheries point of view, maybe not from an ecosystem point of view, but from a fisheries point of view. So you need to do some kind of management here. So if the aquaculture sector is allowed to, is licensed to kill when their livelihood's at stake, I think we need to be looking at something like that to allow harvesters to protect their livelihood. If they're not going to allow a harvest of a population of seals and sea lions, then at least allow us to protect our livelihoods. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McIsaac. Just a follow-up question around that. I was speaking with somebody in Newfoundland recently who was talking about the fact, I was asking about the infrastructure that is in place, particularly the vessels, to be able to do a sustainable seal harvest, to utilize the entire seal. And he was pointing out that it's often quite cold in Newfoundland when these seal harvests are happening, and therefore the refrigeration kind of happens naturally within that process. And I'm wondering if you can share any thoughts around what we have in place currently for infrastructure on the West Coast if we were to look at sustainably harvesting seals, and what would be required to move forward to do that.
I would say that we're losing our infrastructure for fisheries in general on the West Coast. So I would say that there's very little. It would have to be developed.
Thank you. My next question is for Mr. Stayfest. I'm well known for pronouncing names wrong now, it appears. Thank you. So my question to you is around the Columbia River. We've heard it come up a few times in this committee, and I'm wondering if you can share your thoughts and perspectives around what occurred along the Columbia River around the pinniped population, and share any thoughts around that, please.
Sure. Thank you for that question. So on the Columbia River, I think what's important to understand is that this was is a very spatially restricted solution to a problem of excessive consumption of salmon by sea lions caused by man-made infrastructure, mostly dams and fish ladders. And I think what's important is the numbers, right? The total annual allowable removal of sea lions there is around 900, and it's 10% of what a sustainable harvest rate for that population would look like. So that is completely different to a 50% reduction. And the motivation behind the harvest rate is in the Columbia River is, or the removal rate is specifically not to harm the population or change the viability of the population. So it's a very different proposal to like a large scale reduction in seal populations. And I think there's lessons for that for British Columbia. For example, I think a priority, if we're concerned about salmon consumption by seals, would be to look at, are there situations of excessive consumption that are created by human infrastructure that could actually alter or return to a more natural state, do habitat restoration that would benefit both the salmon in terms of better habitat and remove that problem of excessive pinniped predation.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go back to Mr. McIsaac for, I believe, what will be my final question. Mr. McIsaac, you had talked about an ecosystem-based management approach similar to what we see in Parks Canada, and talked about how they do a better job at managing ecosystems than seen within DFO. I'm wondering if you can expand on that and provide some examples of what you were referencing.
Very short answer, please.
So they're not just managing people; they're managing all the species in the ecosystem, and they're looking at species that are expanding at too rapid rate or impacting other species. And DFO is not doing that; they're only managing people in the ecosystem. So and that needs to change if we're going to do ecosystem-based management. And I think that's the goal: is to be doing ecosystem-based management. We are part of the ecosystem, and what we eat matters in the ecosystem. I don't agree that what happens after the harvest doesn't matter in the ecosystem. It certainly does, because if we have to get our food somewhere else, then we're going to make impacts somewhere else. So everything we do in the ecosystem matters, and we need to be thinking a bit broader than what we're doing right now. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Byrne. We'll now go to Mr. Arnold for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I thank the witnesses for being here. I want to start off with Mr. McIsaac. It seems you have fairly extensive industry experience and other people in the industry you talk to. Have you witnessed any human safety concerns from the number of seals and sea lions approaching docks or fishing operations?
I think the graphic that I was number one graphic there from Cowichan Bay was an example of that. The infrastructure that was put in there to protect the vessels in the harbor is now taken over by seals and sea lions through 3 months, and so you can't go onto that dock safely. That's a huge concern. Our fisheries, the amount of seals and sea lions inside of nets is a danger. We have a huge population of sea lions along the outer coast of our Gulf Islands. Going along there in a kayak is threatening to people now because there's so many of them. So there's instances of sea lions coming up to wharfs and yanking children off the wharfs, doing the same in boats.
Thank you for that. We're hoping to get witness testimony from our U.S. counterparts in Washington and Oregon, but I don't know if we're going to be able to get that or not. Would this committee benefit from hearing from what's been taking place in the U.S. from your experience?
I think that would be a very good idea to hear how they're doing a much broader approach to ecosystem-based management there.
And what have you been hearing about what's taking place down there as far as results in increases of returns or any changes that way to harvestable fish stocks?
I haven't been following it as closely as I should be, I guess.
Okay.
But kind of my understanding is it is going in the right direction.
Okay, thank you. If we fail to restore our fish stocks, and particularly salmon stocks on the West Coast, how will local communities and First Nations feed their people?
Well, I think kind of the last 30 years is an example of what's going on, right? I mean, the graphic that I showed of the decreasing salmon population is pretty dramatic, and that's you put that against in its inverse relationship to what's going on with the population of seals and sea lions on our coast. They're eating them, and they're eating a whole bunch of other species. They're having major impact. So, I don't think it bodes well for fisheries for the future if we're not going to manage them somehow.
Thank you. It appears or at least the management system in place is all for managing human harvest or human impact, but fails to manage the other apex predators that might be in the system. Would you agree? Would you say anything further about that?
No, I totally agree. That's exactly what we're doing. We're only managing people. We're not managing the other apex predators. What we did in 1970 is we changed the complete dynamic of our coast and our fisheries.
Okay, thank you. I want to switch to Mr. Blackwood now, if I could. Mr. Blackwood, you were questioned earlier about other departments that may have input towards this issue as far as markets and approval and issues around the U.S. Marine Mammals Protection Act. Should this issue be referred to, in your opinion, should it be referred to other federal departments such as International Trade, Foreign Affairs, Crown Indigenous Relations, or Indigenous Services? Would it be beneficial for those departments or ministries to be aware of what has taken place here?
I think so. I think you've got to, as I said, there's not a conservation issue with respect to, these aren't endangered species in the case of harp seals or gray seals. They're actually species that have reached historic population levels. And earlier, Mr. Steffes said about the range of diet, the items found, I think he said 57, very comparable to harp seals and gray seals. The difference is that we may be reaching a carrying capacity with respect to both of our species. And somebody talked earlier about, they're shifting diets and shifting range. So gray seals are expanding traditionally from Sable Island and now populating, excuse me, the Northumberland Strait, the islands, and down to Southwest Nova with colonies established in Newfoundland and Labrador, we were told, and also in the Cape Breton area. And these new rookeries start up with a few animals, but they quickly grow to several thousand. The numbers are the biggest difference. When we look at Norway or we look at somewhere else, 7.6 million harp seals. Whatever the impact is, at 7.6 million multiplied by anything is fairly large. And there's evidence of opportunistic feeding. And I believe we have cod and capelin are two key species. Capelin is the base of the food chain, and cod as a iconic historical harvest. Those two species are probably in what I'd call a predator pit, or that's what Carl Walters would call it, where the populations may not have been knocked down by seals, but seals, I believe, and I tell you, I worked on whales, my pin, and whale bycatch and dolphin bycatch with World Wildlife Fund in Mexico. So I'm not to go out, let's go kill seals or kill whales and blame them for it. But at our population levels, I truly believe that our traditional fisheries are at risk and that these ecosystems are in a predator pit with everything that comes up in terms of growth or new recruitment gets cropped off.
Thank you, Mr. Arnold. A little bit over, but I want to allow the answer to get put in as testimony. We'll now go to Mr. Hanley for 5 minutes or less, please.
My greetings to everyone, and thanks to the witnesses for your presentations and your thoughts. Mr. Blackwood, I think I'd like to continue with you for now. One of the recommendations from the Atlantic Seal Science Task Team number 3, I wonder if you can comment on that, because I think you reflected a little bit on in your opening remarks about somehow we, after 30 or 40 years of grappling with this problem, we still don't seem to know enough. Recommendation number 3 is about understanding better the relationship between seals and the dynamics of important fish stocks and the marine ecosystem as a whole. And I wonder if you could flesh that out a little bit.
The first 3 recommendations were about understanding better what the impacts are, but at the same time, we documented impacts, I think, that, and it's very difficult to go cause-effect. There's a great correlation between drownings in Canada and popsicle sales, but the two aren't related, even though they're strongly correlated. But the thing I found most interesting is the gap between DFO science that says, and about 50 other scientists looked at the data and verified that it was correct, but the data they were looking at was stomach samples taken in the late fall and early winter in the northeast coast of Newfoundland, places like Lassie and St. Anthony and Wild Cove. If you sample seal stomachs there, George Rose is a groundfish scientist, a cod expert. I asked George to look at where the sampling was done and the time of the year. Most of the seal population is 80 to 100 miles offshore from there, and all the cod and capelin are 80 to 100 miles away from there in the winter. Because of the Labrador current, they can't survive near shore. So you've got a situation where seals, almost like was mentioned, are not man-made structures, but there are areas of cod spawning, and the seals know those areas over evolutionary time. And they show up at those areas. So they may not feed on cod for 6 months of the year, but they may feed intensely during a spawning period that the cod are vulnerable. Same way they would be vulnerable if they're trapped by a fishway on the Columbia River. So the numbers of seals is what's striking on the east coast of Canada compared to elsewhere in the world. There's a huge controversy in Australia, over 100,000 animals. And every time we talk about 7.6 million, and the scientists from Norway talk about the impact on their coastal fisheries when the seals invade. And I'm apologizing for going on, but the sheer numbers of gray seals and the size of the animals and their geographic expansion and the sheer population size of the harp seals, ideally, it would be a harvest that would bring some balance to the ecosystem. It seems to be out of balance now, and I do think there's a predator pit, as I mentioned earlier. So sorry for running on.
Yeah, thank you. That is very helpful. And there are two themes that you mentioned. I want to maybe just pick up in my remaining time. One is I'm from a public health background, so association versus causation, very important. Seals are abundant, fish are scarce, seals eat fish. Where is the association? Where is the causation? I think one of the, but just picking up on what you said about the uniqueness of the East Coast is the reason that we have some differing points of views, even in this hearing today. Are there differences between dynamics on the West Coast and on the East Coast? One thing I think that Mr. Staples mentioned is that the seal population on the West Coast is stable, but that's not what I'm hearing on the West Coast. So are the solutions potentially different on the different coasts because of very different ecosystem dynamics?
I think the ecosystem, if you look at Halliday's work in the ecosystem on the East Coast, there's a certain amount of productivity. There's phytoplankton that turns into zooplankton, turns into capelin or sand lance, and it finds its way somewhere in the ecosystem. And what we're seeing, there's no extra food or extra growth in the system. So we probably got a question of balance between very large marine mammal populations, and at a time that probably due to overfishing, and not blaming seals for the decline, but I do think they're preventing a recovery. And I've been around fisheries as a marine biologist and set up scientific organizations for the past 45 years. And I don't say that very lightly because I don't have a lot of scientific evidence that seals are impacting cod and capelin. But the 2 years I spent studying the science, I identified where the gap was. And the 45 years I've spent watching this fishery collapse and rebuild and collapse, I do believe there is an impact. And our recommendation was that DFO science focus on the offshore areas and throughout the range of harp seals and gray seals and throughout the season. It's that important. If it is having the impact, it needs to be identified. And the current sampling won't identify it.
Thank you, Mr. Hanley. A little bit over. We'll now go to Madam Debian for 2 minutes or less, please. And I'll do the same for Ms. Barron.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to come back to Mr. Stayfest. Earlier, you said that we have to set our objectives. Now, if this committee were to recommend to Fisheries and Oceans Canada to work on establishing sustainable, ethical seal harvesting and training along those lines so that we could bring back ethical and sustainable harvesting within the overall balanced ecosystem approach, what would your objectives be? What does it mean to set objectives for you?
So I think that for me, the objective would be what how DFO approaches seal harvest management right now, which is to ensure that the populations remain healthy and that the ecosystem maintains its function. And so that in itself is counter to the idea of engineering the ecosystem by removing large proportions of one species, for example. And, we also have very specific policy tools. Like, for example, on the West Coast, there's a proposal for a seal harvest where we don't have one. And so I don't see why we shouldn't follow the new emerging fisheries policy, which we've had since 1996. And the concern I have is that by promising these benefits, the unproven benefits to fish stocks, we're hoping to kind of circumvent or undermine some of those sustainable management tools that are in place and that should be followed.
Thank you for that. There's only about 20 seconds left, Madam Debbie, and I don't know if you won't get in a question and answer. You'll be punishing Ms. Barron if you do. Ms. Barron, for 2 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Nobody wants that. My question's for Mr. McIsaac. Mr. McIsaac, we've heard quite a bit about fishers out on the water, their observations of what's happening being different from what DFO is reporting. And I'm wondering how you feel or think, or what you're hearing around how those two can be reconciled. How do we better provide the observations of those out on the water and ensure that they're being used alongside information being compiled by DFO?
Wow, that's a big question, and it's not just to do with seals and sea lions. There's a lot of different observations that are happening on the water that are not reflected in kind of in policy and management. I think there needs to be a better way to work with the department, created with harvesters, and what we're facing on the water right now is, kind of rapid change in our ecosystems. We're facing rapid change in our social systems on land and interactions with other nations, and so we need a management system that is able to be more nimble as our ecosystem changes, to be able to when a harvest is possible, to allow that and to curtail that when something goes down the other way. And we're not there. Like, the example of Picasio on our coast, we've known for 6 years that the population is going right through the roof. And it took management 5 years of that time of harvesters yelling and saying, we need to deal with this, to actually look at the stock assessment and then change it. So we need a way to manage in the face of rapid change.
Thank you, Ms. Barron. A couple of seconds over. I'd like to thank our witnesses for our first hour, Mr. Blackwood, Mr. Steffes, and Mr. McIsaac, for sharing your knowledge with the committee today. We're going to move on to our second hour of testimony, but you're more than welcome to stay online if you want to hear the proceedings from the second hour, or you can sign off, whichever you choose. So we're going to suspend for a moment now. We got one testing to do for the video conference, and then we'll start up again. Meeting suspended. As an individual, we have Ms. Jen Shears, owner of Natural Boutique, here in person. Representing the BC Wildlife Federation, we have Jesse Simon, Executive Director, by video conference. And representing the Lower Fraser Fisheries Alliance, we have Murray Ned Kawilisanton, Executive Director, as well by video conference. Thank you for taking time to appear today. You each have up to 5 minutes for an opening statement. We will start with Ms. Sears, please, for 5 minutes or less.
Hello, bonjour, Quay. Thank you for the invitation to present to you today. My name is Jen Shears, and I'm from Newfoundland. I'm here with the title of owner of Natural Boutique, but I have a lot of other hats that I wear as well. So Natural Boutique is a business that specializes in seal fur products, but I also own several tourism businesses. I'm an activist and writer. I'm a professional fish harvester and seal harvester. I'm an outdoors woman. I'm a mother. I'm a target of animal rights activists. I'm a conservationist. I'm an Indigenous woman of the Halibut Mi'kmaq First Nation. I grew up on the land with great reverence for creatures, lands, and seas. And my post-secondary background is in environmental biology, and I care deeply about animal welfare and about our role as stewards. So some of these roles might seem contradictory, but all of them land me in the same place when it comes to seals. So I support seal management because I care about the environment, conservation, and animal welfare, not despite it. We have a major predicament with seal population. As you heard from Professor Rose in a previous committee meeting, their biomass is greater than that of lower trophic levels, and that's indicative of a very unhealthy ecosystem. So we need to lower the seal population for the sake of other marine species and for seals themselves. So our options to do that: one, government spends money on a cull. They pay people to reduce the population. There would be no other economic generation or spin-off. The government would need to spend money on carcass disposal. Or two, we could enable and empower people to take care of the issue and to make a living for themselves, generate tax revenues, and not waste the resource in the process. So in my opinion, government money would be better used on the latter, but that can only work if government is educated and our markets reopen. So my recommendations, they vary widely in scope and intent. First of all, I think every MP should watch My Ancestors Were Rogues and Murderers by Anne Troke and Angry Inuk by Alethea Arnachuk-Burial. These documentaries are poignant and highlight the injustices brought on by ill-conceived, racist, and deceitful animal rights campaigns. Two, I believe every MP should take the Humane Seal Harvesting course that all sealers need to take. It covers the 3 steps that sealers must follow to ensure they are dispatching of a seal in a humane way. The main issue we have with the sealing industry is that it's perceived as being inhumane. But by taking that training, it's really eye-opening because you see that what we do to ensure that it's humane actually looks to be the opposite. So it would help clear up that misperception. 3, I firmly believe there should be a bipartisan statement from the highest level of government condemning those who campaign against the highly regulated, monitored, humane, and culturally important seal harvests on all Canadian coasts. Doing this would ensure that this important ecological and economic activity would not be used as a political ploy between parties. 4, we're using the precautionary approach for seals, but what about the rest of the ecosystem? Why can't we apply it to the idea that seals are devastating fish stocks? There's no ecological risk to lowering the seal population. We've seen lower levels before, but there's everything to gain, potentially, for other marine species. I've heard people say that they're afraid other countries will cut our market access, but if we don't do something about the seals, there will be nothing to fish. We will have nothing to market. Let's worry about the resource first, and let's put the horse before the cart. 5, we must begin challenging as a country other countries who are contravening international conventions by banning Canadian seal products, including hypocritical countries who actively manage their own pinniped populations as they see fit. I guess it's always great to turn the spotlight away from yourself. Shane Mahoney of Conservation Visions in Newfoundland is an invaluable, internationally renowned expert on this topic, and if he hasn't been an expert to this expert witness, he should be at the top of your list. He talks about how Canada, the EU, and the US are all signatories to the Convention on Biodiversity and Migratory Species, and it commits us to the principles of these conventions. One of the 3 pillars of the Convention on Biodiversity is the sustainable use of living resources for the maximum benefit of people. challenge these countries on why they are in violation of international conventions for which they are signatories. There's also the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. More and more, that includes local people. It's about justice and making sure someone from afar does not impose unjust practices on people, which is happening with the seal products ban. The Government of Canada and others are already committed to principles that should apply to management and markets of seals. Somehow, that's being missed. The United States Marine Mammal Protection Act is a well-intentioned piece of legislation that is grossly misapplied to harp seals in particular. We need to work with the United States to get a seal exemption for the sake of seals themselves. Reducing the population is protecting this marine mammal. Why is enabling
Thank
a
you,
damaging...
Ms. Shears. We're going over the allotted time now, so hopefully anything you didn't get out will come out in questioning.
Thank you.
So we'll move on now to Mr. Zeman for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the opportunity to be a witness. The BC Wildlife Federation is British Columbia's leading conservation organization. We're the largest and oldest conservation organization with over 41,000 members and 100 clubs across the province. As it relates to watersheds, wetlands, salmon, steelhead, and sturgeon, our clubs and members spend hundreds of thousands of volunteer dollars and hours conducting habitat restoration across the province, operating hatcheries that were defunded by DFO, and advocating for legislative, regulatory, and policy changes to support a future that includes abundant salmon and steelhead. As it relates to water, wetlands, and fish, the BCWF invests millions of dollars annually in projects working with First Nations and other partner groups. Considering most BC presenters will be discussing salmon and pinnipeds today, I will stick to steelhead. I'd like to remind the committee steelhead are slightly different from other salmon species in the sense that they survive after spawning. These fish are called kelts. Kelts are capable of returning to the ocean and coming back to spawn a second time as older, bigger fish. Bigger fish means more eggs, which means more offspring. In the past, I've spoken to you regarding the peer-reviewed process through the Canadian Science Advisory Secretariat, which is supposed to be a formal, transparent process for providing peer-reviewed science advice to DFO and the public. This process is integral to Canada's Species at Risk Act. And as it relates to endangered interior Fraser steelhead, this process was completely undermined. In that process, pinniped predation on smolts and adult steelhead, competition with other salmon in the ocean, interception through fishing, ocean conditions, and freshwater conditions were all identified as factors which could support recovery. Out of all those factors, pinniped predation was identified as the single largest driver, but in the report, all factors were lumped together and without identifying the relative importance of each, which will likely keep DFO off the hook for doing something meaningful to recover these endangered fish. In the Puget Sound south of the border, steelhead populations have declined to less than 5% of their historic levels. South of the border, they invest orders of magnitude more into monitoring, research, and generally into science and management. The indicators which explain the most variance in steelhead smolt survival included harbor seal abundance, hatchery chinook, salinity of marine waters, and river discharge. Seal abundance was the strongest predictor. As it relates to pinnipeds and steelhead in BC, the Salish Sea Marine Survival Project has shown extensive predation of steelhead smolts and adults by harbor seals. In the past, we have discussed the crash of interior Fraser steelhead, namely the Thompson and Chilcotin River fish, which respectively outnumbered 3,000 fish each in 1985, but saw just an estimated 19 and 104 fish in 2022. These are not the only steelhead populations which are rapidly being managed to zero. On Vancouver Island, the story is much the same, but in some watersheds, the outcome is even worse. The Gold River on Vancouver Island's west coast was once famous for its steelhead fishing. Winter steelhead snorkel counts were as high as 909 fish in 1999. Since 2019, the annual snorkel count was 4, 0, 2, and 0 fish, respectively. The current steelhead population in the Gold River is less than 10% of the watershed's carrying capacity. Over the past decade, monitoring on the Gold River by provincial biologists and the Muchlet First Nations has identified consistent use of the river and estuary by harbor seals, when the only notable prey available would have been steelhead, despite being nearly extirpated. Even when there are thousands of tons of herring spawning in front of the Gold River, seals have been observed hunting in the river for the few steelhead which remain. In river, steelhead were historically found using runs and pools in the river, and they are now found hiding in rocks in extremely shallow parts of the river to avoid predation. This has recently been noted by anglers and biologists on rivers across Vancouver Island. The Gold River fish are headed for extirpation and will not recover without intervention. At home with the BC Wildlife Federation, after years of webinars and presentations from academics and researchers on salmon regarding the trends around steelhead as well, last week the BC Wildlife Federation passed a resolution at its convention and annual general meeting in Nanaimo to support a sustainable and managed harvest of pinnipeds. Our organization and member clubs, which again spend millions of dollars restoring habitat, operating hatcheries, and advocating for policies that support a future for salmon, steelhead, and sturgeon, now officially supports the management of pinnipeds. As it relates to steelhead and a number of salmon populations, we are in a crisis. We need to use all of the tools in the toolbox employing adaptive management. And as a country, we need to be laser focused on outcomes, not process. I'll end to say steelhead are endangered, pinnipeds are not. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. That was right on the mark for timing. We'll now go to Mr. Ned Kuwilasuntan for 5 minutes or less, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon to all, and thanks for the invitation. My name is Murray Ned, Executive Director of the Lower Fraser Fisheries Alliance, and I have been with the organization since its inception in 2010. We currently have a small program staff of 4 and 10 biologists and technicians that oversee work that includes habitat restoration, resource management, stewardship, and science activities. The Lower Fraser Fisheries Alliance provides coordination, communications, advisory, and technical support to 30 of the Lower Fraser First Nations. Today, I'm speaking to you from Seamas First Nation, British Columbia, to offer a Lower Fraser First Nations perspective on the impacts of pinniped populations. The Lower Fraser region spans 200 kilometers from the mouth of the Fraser River to Yale, British Columbia, and includes 5 watersheds with hundreds of tributaries, of course. Seals and seal lines have always been part of the Fraser River ecosystem, and the relationship with salmon has existed since time immemorial. Unlike salmon, pinnipeds have been able to sustain a consistent and healthy population since the 90s and perhaps even before that. We have seen them regularly at the mouth of the Fraser River right up to the Yale Canyon, but now their presence is observed in many of our shallow tributaries just several kilometers from the Fraser main stem. The assumption is that they are feeding on juvenile and adult salmon and other resident species, but that is yet to be determined. We all know that Fraser salmon have been in a crisis for the last few decades across many stocks and species and face an overwhelming number of impacts, including habitat degradation, climate change, pollution, disease, and most recently 2021 atmospheric rivers that wreaked havoc during spawning migration on all of the tributaries and the Fraser to some extent. We also know pinniped predation has an impact on salmon, and that this was identified as a limiting factor during the recent species at risk assessment process for Fraser Chinook, Fraser sockeye, interior Fraser coho, and interior Fraser steelhead. What we don't know is the extent of pinniped impacts, as there has been limited government interest in investing in this important work. Any proposed pinniped management strategy should prioritize the collection of baseline data in order to be able to produce accurate population estimates and determine what their predation impacts are on Lower Fraser salmon and passing stocks to the Upper and Mid Fraser. The strategy must also consider and respect the inherent rights of Lower Fraser First Nations, who have the capacity and expertise to lead this work if properly resourced. A study and methodology framework has been developed by the Lower Fraser Fisheries Alliance to conduct this study, and there's strong support from the Lower Fraser Collaborative Table, which is a complement of the Area E commercial sector, 7 recreational agencies, and 23 First Nations. With the enactment of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, we see a great opportunity for the federal government and others to partner with the Lower Fraser Fisheries Alliance to conduct this work within the territories of the nations. Further, we see this as a form of guardianship and much-needed technical work that would further develop the capacity of nations and their members and produce valuable data, inclusive research in the best interests of all British Columbians, and of course the salmon. Fraser salmon have been in a crisis for far too long, and it's imperative that we determine if pinniped predation is contributing to their decline. Time is of the essence. We must act now. So thank you again for the time, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for that. We'll now go to our round of questions. We'll start off with Mr. Arnold for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. I'll start off with Mr. Zeman, if I could. Mr. Zeman, you mentioned, I believe you said a series of evidence and science information. I believe that fed into a CSAS process on the assessment of probability of recovery for the Thompson-Chilcotin steelhead. And we've also heard in this committee previously about what went into that process versus what came out of it. Could you elaborate a little further on what you may have know about that process on the recovery chances of steelhead?
Yeah, certainly, and we have talked to the committee about this a number of times. The reality is that is supposed to give us all, you folks in Ottawa and all of the rest of us in Canada, the best available science. And what we know, what happened behind the scenes, is that the peer-reviewed document had been altered. It's only recently been released after years and years of ATIP and media attention. And as I said in this presentation today, when we look at the covariates that were examined, seal and sea lion adult predation and seal smolt predation come up as two of the most significant factors.
The most significant factors for steelhead recovery, is that correct?
Yep, driving the declines. Yep. So they came in at number one and number two, and then it looks like number three was salmon competition in the Pacific, and a lot of that revolves around international relations and other countries dumping millions and millions of pink and chum salmon into the Pacific.
Would that be what is referred to as the salmon ranching?
Yep, absolutely.
Just so we've got it in the testimony, if you can confirm that.
Yes, that's what's referred to as salmon ranching, yes.
Thank you. The limiting factors on steelhead recovery, would it correlate that those same limiting factors would apply to other salmonids that we're seeing struggling? I believe Mr. Ned mentioned Chinook and other species.
Yeah, there's been tons of work, and you all have heard from the experts, and my colleague, Mr. Ned, mentioned the Chinook review as well. Pinniped predation is coming up regularly for most species that are being evaluated, and of course, once we get into the land of CSAS and the Species at Risk Act, you're jumping into a very large pool with a very little bit of water left in it. So once you get into this time where we're looking at endangered fish, you're probably a few decades behind, and the message there is it costs orders of magnitude more to bring those fish back from the brink than it does to manage them sustainably and to get ahead of the curve.
Okay, thank you. I'll switch to Mr. Ned if I could. Now, Mr. Ned, you talked about your First Nations there have been witnessing and seeing pinnipeds in the mainstream of the Fraser for millennia, basically. How far up the Fraser and how extensive is the observations in the tributaries now?
It's pretty vast. Let's say, the Fraser main stem, when I fish, it doesn't take long before they accompany me to my net, and then they're harvesting on their own in the Fraser main stem. So whenever we get opportunities, they're front and center. They're very smart animals, and they know the sound of boats, and they know what you're doing. So it doesn't take long for them to be attracted to both the sound and then the fishery. But in terms of tributaries from my territory, where I'm at in the Seamas, Vedder, Chilliwack region, the Vedder Chilliwack system has plenty of pinnipeds in that system, but also in the Seamas River and the Marshall Creek. Marshall Creek is a small creek that is only about 1.5 feet, maybe 2 feet deep at the best of times, and it's maybe 6 feet wide. And I've witnessed pinnipeds in that system. So they are anywhere and everywhere that there's a food source.
That would not be typical pinniped habitat. What would drive them into that habitat? Would it be lack of food elsewhere, or is there something more attractive there?
that's the kind of work we would love to be able to do on behalf of Canada and BC and our nations here, is to determine why they're there, number one. But my assumption is that they're just following food, just like us. If we find a food source, we're going to follow it, and I think that's what they're doing.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Shears, you've mentioned, and if you can briefly, could you describe a little bit further how you've been, I guess, victimized by the anti-seal harvest associations, if you could?
Thanks for the question. It's sometimes pretty intense, the onslaught. So my daughter and I, she was 18 months at the time, we were threatened to be dissolved in acid. We get threats that they're going to come track us down at our house and things like that, which is, it's really unfortunate because we're just living sustainably off the land. And as a human species, if we stop doing that, if we stop relying on renewable resources that are abundant, that yield biodegradable, healthy, sustainable products, like what else do we have? If we stop doing that, what else do we have as a planet? So it's very short-sighted and pretty vicious, I will say, on times.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Arnold. We'll now go to Mr. Hardy for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Listening and reading, all the testimony, certain things start to triangulate. And there was a particularly interesting piece out of Washington State that I'd like some reaction to. In Puget Sound, they did a little bit of work on basically their allowance to enact what they call specific lethal management strategies. Under the MMPA, states can request this. And what they did was they played off something we heard in earlier testimony here, that sometimes it's man-made infrastructure like fish ladders or log booms or other things that provide a nice spot for the seals to hang out so that they can feed on the fish that are concentrated in that area. But, and somebody just recently said that, that pinnipeds are very, very clever. They're very smart. And this sentence from the Washington State report maybe leads us somewhere. It says, the removal of individual California sea lions with specific knowledge of sites at Willamette Falls also reported successful reduction in the use of the sites by sea lions and in the recruitment of new individuals. These outcomes suggest it may be feasible to disrupt socially transmitted predation behaviors among pinnipeds by removing individual specialists. That sort of says something about, again, how clever these animals are, but it also perhaps suggests that we don't need to go down the route that the representative from the Suzuki Foundation was concerned, that we would go out and willy-nilly cull seals with a massive reduction, but to do something that we've actually heard referenced before, and that is to go after the problem animals. I'm wondering, Mr. Zeman, if you could comment on that as the potential for something that would allow for a reasonable size of a harvest, and given current market conditions, a useful outcome for what we harvest, and avoid doing the sort of things that would clearly get activists on case as Ms. Shears has experienced.
Yeah, certainly. I can share that I've also received more than my fair share of death threats as it relates to endangered caribou recovery. So I live in that world, and quite frankly, I don't think there's room for that in our society. And there needs to be a broader discussion about what's okay and what's not. As it relates to what's going on down south, when I refer to the Gold River, Mr. Hardy, you probably know where that is. That is not a system that has a whole bunch of, quote unquote, man-made or anthropogenic change on it. So those seals are, in essence, what you're saying, they're specializing. We experience this with mountain caribou and cougars at times too. too. But if we take it a step farther, so there's the in-river piece, there's log booms. I'm sure that's all contributing. With our steelhead, we've put transmitters on about 35 kelts before they go out to the ocean. Not one of those has come back and made it back to the river, and half of those are not making it from the inshore environment. So within a kilometer essentially of the coast, half of them are dying. So, I'll refer and defer to Dr. Carl Walters. I'll defer to Murray around that. We had First Nations attend our AGM on the weekend, and from their perspective, they've always harvested seals and they've always managed seals. So I think, there's the in-river and close-in environment, but I think that also there's the environment in the Pacific.
Okay,
and the big thing
I have to intercept you here because I have another question that I want to pose to all of you, and I know you won't all have time to respond, but if you could present something in writing, that would be useful. We have heard that the main barrier to managing the populations is public perception that this is cruel, that has been certainly driven by a lot of people who may have good intentions but really don't understand what life is like for the people who are actually involved and a stakeholder in all of this. So what do we do? Murray, maybe I'll turn to you for a comment, but the others can chime in written-wise if necessary. Can we mobilize First Nations group? Can we mobilize fisheries unions on both sides of the border to really come up with, a single voice as to what needs to be done and how best it's to be done?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I appreciate it. And I think our first initiative would be to get the baseline data and information on the population. That's what we want to do. And then determine if they're overpopulated. And I don't think we have that information at this point. And if there was a surplus of pinnipeds available, then we would look to harvesting, of course, and that would also contribute to saving many of the salmon that my friend Jesse and others are talking about. In terms of proactive work to be done with our U.S. counterparts, I'd love to do that work. I'm a commissioner on the Pacific Salmon Treaty, and we often are working with the tribal groups down there. And as well, we have a Coast Salish Gathering, which is 54 First Nations and tribes within the Pacific Northwest. So all that to say is we can learn from one another, and we must learn from one another and utilize that into the future.
Thank you, Mr. Hardy. And if the others have an answer to that particular question, by all means, please send it in to the clerk, and we'll make sure it's a part of the committee study. They'll now go to Madame Debienne for 6 minutes or less, please.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses. They're always very much appreciated. Ms. Shears, I was very moved because you have a very human-based approach, and you seem to have marked respect for the animal, preserving its survival, the ecological balance, and you also have a concern for resources, because as you've said, if we don't manage the pinniped population, we won't have any market left because we won't have any fish left. So you've got a great overview. So in 2023, how can we re-establish acceptability? I think you've got the right line, the right approach, but how can we have further outreach? Can we give you a helping hand with this? Well, as I said in my presentation, people in the government have to be aware and informed about what's actually supporting these activities, such as the process for hunting a seal. There's various stages that you have to go through to be in compliance with the regulations. First of all, there needs to be education so that people in power know what this actually implies and how the process is pursued, and there needs to be partnerships. As someone has just said, partnerships with other industries elsewhere, such as down in the US, so that they can then share and relay the same message. But I think education is really key. When you're talking about education, there's several strands, several aspects implied in this word education. There's different educational approaches that can be taken, for example, on the ethical techniques and how to carry out seal hunting in a way that maximizes the resource so that we don't sacrifice the life of the animal and waste 3/4 of the animal's body. So that's one educational part. And then secondly, perhaps there needs to be an opening up to have some sort of competence or skills around ethical seal hunting, because education is a very broad term. Could you make it more specific? So education about the products. I think this is starting now with the Canadian Seal Products Organization. They're educating people about the fact that these are sustainable and biodegradable products, and they contribute to people's health and also to the animals themselves. It is rather a difficult point because the organizations that are against seal hunting reality isn't necessarily what they want to hear or what they want to present. But if we can try and communicate with Canadians in general to educate them about the seal hunt and the results of this hunt, then I think that would be an important thing to do, as well as, of course, educating people who are in power so that you can then defend seal hunting when necessary. Do you think that organizational support and legislative and financial support could open up an opportunity if we support organizations that have got a positive message to send out? Of course, is the answer. And if we can show that these countries are going against the Convention on Biodiversity when they introduce these bans. So if we can demonstrate that and confront these bans in that way, I think we can show the world that we're on the right track. So we need to equip ourselves so that we come out with a counterweight message to this mistaken propaganda. Thank you. That's it for me.
Bien, we'll now go to Ms. Barron for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you to the witnesses for being here. Ms. Shears, I was wondering if you can explain a little bit further. You had talked about the ways in which the seal product ban is in direct contradiction with UNDRIP. Can you expand on that?
Yeah. Well, we have Indigenous populations and local populations saying that the bans are reducing prices overall, so it's not worthwhile for them to go out to harvest the products and to put it to market. So, I mean, things like, I'm a broken record sometimes, but like Angry Inuk shows you a prime example of how these bans are spitting in the face of Indigenous peoples and of local rural Canadians, and for no good reason. It's hypocritical, it's racist, it does no good for the wildlife and that these organizations claim to care about. It's so short-sighted, and I honestly can't believe we're here in 2023 when renewable resources that are abundant, biodegradable products, healthy things, humane harvesting are so important to the world. And we're here trying to figure out how to make it happen. It contravenes conventions, it contravenes common sense, it contravenes how we should be living. So yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Shears. Thank you. And I'm wondering, Mr. Ned, do you prefer now quercetin? I was wondering if you wanted to share any thoughts, because I know you had also mentioned as well around the direct impacts and contradictions with UNDRIP.
Yeah, thank you. And you did pretty well with the pronunciation, quercetin. Yeah, I think most nations are starting their path forward in terms of UNDRIP implementation, and sometimes we have to wait for government ministries like DFO to begin implementing it. we can't wait too long, especially with the decline of salmon. I know we're talking about pinnipeds here, but maybe we have to do the balance. We have an inherent right and an obligation to look after resources within our territories. And certainly the nations are looking at that as an opportunity to work with government, partner if we can. And if we can't, I think there's, sometimes you just have to do things for the sake of the resource. And, we often, as an example, we have Chinook for salmon ceremonies, and we can't have those now for a number of reasons. Climate change, I mentioned that in my comments, what's affecting salmon. But if we can't have those, then we have to figure out what the issues are. And sometimes it is predation, and it's pinnipeds actively going after those particular fish. So in terms of UNDRIP and DRIPA and reconciliation, the time is now, and First Nations are ready, at least in the Lower Fraser.
Thank you so much. My next question is to Mr. Zeman. Mr. Zeman, I'm so sad that I wasn't able to make the BC Wildlife Convention in, of course, my riding that took place just recently in Nanaimo. And I was wondering if you can expand a little, because it was unfortunate that I missed it, around the resolution that you were referencing that was brought forward around a sustainable seal harvest.
Yeah, so being such a big organization, it is a major operation to bring representatives for over 41,000 people. But essentially, we have resolutions that come forward every year, and we deal with them. One came forward around pinnipeds, and we had Dr. Murdoch McAllister speaking. We're actually supporting a postdoc at UBC around steelhead recovery, and so we deferred the resolution until after he was done. And essentially, as an organization now who is involved in all facets of trying to restore salmon, the message is we support pinniped management. We obviously support, what Ms. Scheer is talking about around sustainable use. That's a way of life for us and for our members. And I know certainly, as Marie referred to the Lower Fraser Collaborative Table, we're a part of that. And there is consistency across all groups. We have our days where there's fireworks, but as it relates to pinnipeds, I think there's consistency across everyone. So it's just a way to formalize how we think and how we kind of lead as a conservation organization.
Thank you so much. I believe this will be my final question, looking at my time, but I'll try to get more in because I do that. The Steelhead Society is another organization that I have met with as well, and thank you for bringing up the impacts on steelhead. One of the key recommendations that the Steelhead Society is bringing forward in order to begin protecting steelhead is around the monitoring and comprehensive data gathering. And you had spoken a little bit about this as well. I'm wondering if you can speak to whether you're in agreement with that is one of the number one things that needs to happen, and how it relates to pinniped management.
Yeah, we have a number of systems that we monitor extensively. And as said, the Gold River was on the Vancouver Island. It's on the west coast, of course. You know where it is. It's right kind of a couple hours from your backyard. But when you get down and you start counting zeros, the time for monitoring has long passed us. And when we get down to 20 fish in the Chilcotin and 104 in the Thompson, we can start counting in the Skeena and do a better job because we still have thousands of fish. But on Vancouver Island and off of the Fraser, we do not have thousands of fish to count anymore. And so, again, I would urge this committee to really take the triage approach and say, we don't have any fish in these areas. We need to start pulling all tools available so that we can ensure that these animals, these fish, do not go functionally extinct.
Thank you, Ms. Barron. We'll now go to Mr. Small for 5 minutes or less and not a second over.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question to Ms. Shears. You mentioned an underlying racism in animal rights campaigns against sealing. Would you like to elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, so it's such a loaded question, but when the anti-seal hunt or animal rights groups in general target peoples that are, they might not necessarily intend to target them, but when you're targeting people that live off the land, you're targeting Indigenous peoples, you're targeting rural peoples, and they don't seem to have any concept or regard for how humans are part of the ecosystem, and how since time immemorial, we are part of the ecosystem. We're no better, we're no worse, but we're with it. We certainly do have the steward component of it, but they have no regard. Like the EU ban, for example, in 2009, they put the exemption for Indigenous products, but Indigenous peoples and Indigenous communities themselves said this does not work for us because this drives the price so low for seal pelts, for example, that it doesn't make it financially feasible anymore. Yet they just went on their merry way and carried on with their tactics and their plans, despite it's very patronizing and racist for sure.
Thank you, Ms. Scheer. Would you be able to tell the committee about your experience in your business with Natural Boutique, with potential customers from outside Canada, what you've experienced in terms of demand for your products?
Sure. Thanks. Yeah, so we have lots of demand from the United States and Europe. We have orders coming online because people don't bother to read might not bother to read the line below saying we can't send to the States or the EU, but maybe they might be trying to get us to ship it anyway. So we have orders that come in maybe every couple of weeks, every month, that we need to refund and reply to them and say, we're sorry, we can't ship there due to ill-conceived bans. And we get cruise ships. We're downtown St. John's on Water Street, and cruise ships come in, thousands of people at a time, most of them Americans, and they just flock to the store. They love the product. They love the idea of it. We actually had our staff members take the humane harvesting course, so even though they're not sealers, they're well informed on the whole process. And the people that visit, they want to buy it. They want to support local. They want to support renewable products, and we just have to ask them, you ask, where are you from? And you just hope they don't say the United States, but that they're going to say that, and they walk out. So, yeah, I'd say over the past 12 months, I've had to refund maybe $25,000 to people from the United States. That's not counting the people that would have bought, but they did read the disclaimer at the bottom and didn't bother placing the order. So the market is there, and we have people crying out for it, but we just can't fill them.
So just briefly, if we could get our seal products exempted under Marine Mammal Protection Act, how big of an impact would that have for our markets for seal products?
I don't think it can be quantified, and that's like in terms of being astronomical. I think opening up the American market would be a game changer.
In terms of the Canadian market, do you think some sort of tax break, a HST holiday or tax credit on the purchase of pinniped products would help us to get some growth in the Canadian market for that product, if the government would support it in that way? What do you think of that?
Oh, absolutely. A tax credit of some sort always helps people purchase things. So, yeah, I think that would be a wonderful thing that would help us in our local market and get people buying more seal products.
Mr. Chair, I'm going to give my colleague the floor here.
Well, thank you. That's beyond generous. So my question is for the BC Wildlife Federation. Given the decision to not actively manage a large component of the ecosystem when it comes to pinnipeds, is there any other example in British Columbia right now where a government has basically made an emotional decision to not actively manage through hunting or another type of way to manage apex predators to the detriment of future ungulates, or in this case, fish when it comes to seals? And what is the damage that is done when these emotional-based decisions are followed through on that are not rooted in science at all?
I'm going to have to ask for a write-in for the answer. It's gone a little bit over time right now. So we'll move on now to Mr. Cormier for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And today I will give my time to Mr. Callaway.
Identifying as Mr. Callaway right now?
I don't think so,
Oh,
no.
okay.
You'd have a job to pull that off.
There you go. Trust me, you don't want to be Mr. Callaway. And thank you. That is also generous, Mr. Cormier, through the chair. I would like to make a comment and then a question to Ms. Scheers. You mentioned about the threats that your family have have been under, have experienced. And you mentioned it's unfortunate, and you mentioned it's racist, and yes, it's wrong, it's vile, and I would argue it's criminal. So I'm sorry that you have to go through that on a regular basis, it seems. And I also want to go a little deeper in terms of your thoughts to the study and as it relates to our recommendations, because we've heard a lot of great points have been made in relation to looking to access to markets, looking at the infrastructure that is needed, looking at how do we align coalitions of the willing. We've heard today Mr. Hardy mentioning Indigenous people in the United States and Indigenous people in Canada working together. How do we work that? How do we look at other examples? One thing I will mention is that, Mr. Hardy in particular has mentioned numerous times, asked many questions on what happened to the seals in Norway, and no one seems to know what happened to the seals in Norway. It would have been good to have gone over to Norway to ask that question of locals, and we seem to not have that opportunity here to have people come and testify. Either there's an unwillingness or there is a worry to do so. But all that being said, when we look at the recommendations that come down and you go to look at this report, what, as a business person, as somebody that relies on this to make a living, that's part of your culture, who you are, what would you want to see in this recommendation that would catch your interest and eye in terms of getting a foothold and moving forward on this?
I would like to see an acknowledgement of traditional knowledge, an acknowledgement of local knowledge, and those things are huge. I would like to see a gap analysis in the current science that we have, because I think if we can show the science that we have isn't really relevant, I think that's a lot of it. The science we have isn't really relevant, but the stuff we do have does confirm what many of the witnesses are saying. I would like to see an acknowledgement of that, and I would like to see the ocean and the government, as it's been for many years, as far as the seal hunt goes, has a lot of invertebrates. I think a backbone needs to be grown, frankly, by people, maybe in the past, maybe in the present, because we are letting people dictate how we manage our resources, and they're dictating it based on emotion and based on some other reality that I don't know what reality that is, but it's definitely not the reality on the ground or in the oceans. So I would like an acknowledgement of that. I would like a backbone, and I would like an acknowledgement of what people have been saying for the last 30 years on the ground, because I think there's a lot of value in that.
That's duly noted. I appreciate the vertebrae example in terms of having backbone and resolve to this. And, again, we've heard a lot of great testimony in terms of, looking at, let me just say this. There's no one around this table that has ever said the word cull. I haven't heard it. No one has talked about it. Some people, witnesses, have talked about it. We're talking about how do we create a harvest that is inclusive of First Nations, that focuses on the need to open our markets, and how do we do that? And there's a common willingness here. A lot of times in Ottawa, when you turn on CPAC, you see a lot of interesting theatrics on all sides. But we need to get this right. It's important. It's important to not just the species of fish. We've heard 4 species are in danger, probably more. We've talked about the inability of people who rely on this as a culture and livelihood being harassed. We need to turn that around. I appreciate your efforts and your resolve and your backbone. You talk about backbone in terms of the greater we, but I appreciate your backbone, because the way we're going to move forward is not just government, but it's going to be establishing coalitions of industry, fishing unions, academics, other levels of government, First Nations governments, and so forth and so on. So I really appreciate your opening remarks, but I also appreciate you talking about the fact that we need to acknowledge traditional knowledge.
Thank you, Mr. Callaway.
Thank you.
I want to get to Madame Debienne and Ms. Barron before we close off. Madame Debienne, for 2.5 minutes or less, please.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Chair. We've very much appreciated the presence of everyone. I haven't been able to put questions to everyone, however. And I don't want to mispronounce your name, so I'm going to use your first name, Murray. I'd like to hear from you about the space that we need to give to on-the-ground or on-the-sea knowledge in a reflection at the moment about re-establishing the pinniped population. Re-establishment of an acceptable non-toxic population that wouldn't be toxic for the rest of resources. So what space should be given to this knowledge on the sea, on the ground? Do we have sufficient knowledge, and should we give it more importance, more space?
I'm not sure I understood your question completely, but I'm going to try. In terms of the space that's required, and the first thing I would say to share out with everybody is First Nations have been displaced from the ability to manage for over 150 years in the territories here. So we're renewing our interest is maybe a good way of trying to describe how we want to move forward in terms of how to manage the resource moving forward. And conservation has always been important to the nations, of course, and we've had our own ways of managing that historically. And this is why we want to find the baseline data for the particular pinnipeds that are in our Lower Fraser region to be able to manage that resource in partnership with others if others are interested. But we really see the UN Declaration and the inherent rights to try and advance that. And I don't know that I answered your question completely, and I apologize for that if I did, but if you wanted to provide more clarity in the question, I'd give it another shot.
Merci.
Thank you.
Madame Debienne, we'll now go to Ms. Barron for 2.5 minutes, please, or less.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Shears, I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more. You had spoken about the business and that you're having to refund sales from the EU and from the US. Where are people purchasing your goods? I can't find a better word than that right now, from, and what does that look like as far as the distribution of sales locally, domestically, and internationally?
So when we first opened up shop in 2012 in St. John's, we knew that Christmas season would be really busy with locals, but my husband and I were saying, well, what are we going to put in the store in the summertime? We'll have to sell Newfoundland T-shirts or something like that, or CDs. As it turns out, visitors love the products. And so we've really benefited from people from Ontario, from Quebec, from British Columbia and Alberta, purchasing things on their holidays, bringing it home, spreading the word, spreading the messaging that we're able to. I mean, I believe firmly that we can start off with positive messaging to influence people. I don't turn my nose up at kicking doors down sometimes when I need to, but positive messaging and working my way into it is the way that I like to start. So they've spread the messaging and they've spread the products around, and then we get online orders and the comments say, our friends bought it when they were in Newfoundland and we saw it, liked it, so now we're ordering it. So all through the country, really.
And nowhere outside the country currently?
Not really, no. People buy it from the EU because I think as it stands, they can bring items in personally. It's just we can't ship it as a business. So Europeans have purchased it. Some European parliamentarians actually purchased seal coats a few years ago when that whole kerfuffle was happening, and they brought it back and loved it. So, but yeah, mostly Canada.
Oh, I have more questions if there's more time. 30 seconds. Okay, great. Thank you. Quick question then to Mr. Zeman. Mr. Zeman, I believe you had mentioned the CSAS process, and I'm wondering if you did, if you can speak a little bit as to how the CSAS process has impacted management decisions around pinniped harvesting.
Well, I think that the steelhead is just really an observation that the process is broken and that there is bureaucratic interference happening in the world of science, and that is not good for any of us. And it doesn't matter if it's fish or seals or sturgeon. It matters that the right decision or the right information is getting out to the right people so they can make the right decision.
Thank you, Ms. Barron. And I'm going to allow Mr. Calkins to ask a question instead of having him there with playing with his phone. So, Mr. Calkins, you're up for a couple of minutes, and the clock is ticking.
Thank you, Chair.
I feel generous.
I did ask a question that didn't get answered, so I would repose the question to the BC Wildlife Federation about when governments are afraid to manage an entire tier of the ecosystem, such as what happens with the Marine Mammal Protection Act, and now we see individual choices like grizzly bears and other apex predators in provinces such as British Columbia, where ministers during their announcements actually say that the decision has nothing to do with science and has everything to do with emotion, what the long-term consequences of the rest of the food chain will look like, and including any negative human-wildlife conflicts that are bound to arise.
Yeah, and sorry, and that's kind of the same as the last question. In our world of sustainability and conservation, science is what guides us. We have experienced the same thing federally as it relates to wolves and caribou, as we have with grizzly bears. And I refrain from speaking on behalf of First Nations, but I can tell you in British Columbia, a number of our partners and nations that we've worked with as it relates to wildlife management and conservation, that the values align completely. So I'll echo in small part what Murray and Jen said around the world of reconciliation. These values quite often are shared, and elected officials are not listening.
Thank you, Mr. Calkins. And I want to say a big thank you, of course, to our witnesses for this second hour of testimony, to Mr. Zeman, Mr. Ned Kuwilasuntan, and, of course, to Ms. Shears for sharing their knowledge with us this afternoon, and to Ms. Shears for appearing in person. It's always nice to have people in the flesh, so to speak, so as we can get the expressions and they can see exactly how the committee operates. So, again, I will let the committee know that on Monday we will have our 8th and final meeting with the witnesses for Pinniped study for next week, which of course is May 1st. And on Thursday, we will provide drafting instructions to the analysts for the report on pinnipeds and of course discuss committee business. So that will be next Thursday. So keep that in mind if you have anything to raise during committee business, and as well drafting instructions to for this particular study. So again, everybody enjoy your weekend. Madame Debienne.
Je m'excuse de prendre.
Sorry, just 30 seconds. I'd just like to say, Chair, that I really appreciate the way that you run this committee. We always have our 2.5 minutes, and I really appreciate our colleagues. Things are going well. Often we complain when things are going badly, but they're going well, so we need to mark that too. So thank you also to the interpreters. Thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.